The afternoon sun streamed through the small oval windows of Flight 2463 as passengers filed into the narrow cabin. The flight from Atlanta to Chicago was nearly full, with travelers juggling carry-on bags and searching for their assigned seats. Among them was Melissa Thompson, a tall woman with highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes after a week of high-pressure meetings that hadn't gone as planned. Melissa checked her boarding pass again, seat 14C, middle seat. She sighed heavily, already annoyed at the thought of being sandwiched between strangers for the 2-hour flight. When she reached row 14, she found the window seat already occupied by a little girl with braided hair and colorful beads, drawing in a sketchbook. The child, 8-year-old Zoe Williams, looked up briefly and gave a shy smile before returning to her artwork. "Excuse me," said the woman beside Zoe. "I think we're your roommates." "I'm Diana, and this is my daughter." Melissa nodded curtly without introducing herself. She stuffed her designer handbag under the seat in front and settled in, immediately putting on her noise-canceling headphones. The flight attendants went through their safety demonstration, while Melissa scrolled through work emails on her phone, ignoring the instructions to put electronic devices away. 20 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Diana helped Zoe set up her tray table for a small snack and juice box. Zoe hummed softly as she peeled an orange, her legs swinging happily beneath her seat. "Can you stop that?" Melissa snapped, pulling one side of her headphones away. "Your kicking is shaking my whole seat." "I'm sorry," Zoe whispered, immediately stilling her legs. Diana gave an apologetic look. "She's just excited." "This is her first flight," Diana explained. Melissa rolled her eyes and went back to her music and emails. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence, causing it to dip suddenly. That's when it happened. Zoe's apple juice tipped over, spilling across the tray table and splashing onto Melissa's cream-colored pants and the corner of her leather handbag. The cold liquid soaked through immediately. "Oh my goodness!" Diana gasped, quickly grabbing napkins. "I'm so sorry about that." But Melissa was already on her feet, as much as the low ceiling would allow. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed, her voice rising. "Do you know how much this bag costs?" "More than your whole outfit, I bet." Diana continued apologizing while trying to help clean up, but Melissa slapped her hand away. "Don't touch my things. You people never teach your kids any manners." The phrase "you people" hung in the air, its meaning unmistakable. Several passengers in nearby rows turned to look. "Please lower your voice," Diana said firmly. "It was an accident. She's just a child." Zoe's eyes filled with tears as she shrunk into her seat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't fix my $900 bag, does it?" Melissa's face reddened as her volume increased. Then came words that made the entire section of the plane go silent, racial slurs directed at both mother and daughter. An older man across the aisle spoke up. "That's enough, lady. It's just juice." "Mind your business," Melissa snapped back, then turned to Diana. "You should control your kid better. This is exactly why I hate flying with." She used another slur, even louder this time. Several passengers gasped. A flight attendant started making his way down the aisle toward the commotion. Zoe began to cry, and Diana put a protective arm around her daughter. "There's no need for that kind of language," Diana said, her voice trembling but dignified. Something in Melissa seemed to snap. She reached across and shoved Zoe's shoulder, pushing the child hard against the window. "Stop that crying." "I can't stand that noise." Diana unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Don't you dare touch my daughter." The flight attendant arrived at their row. "What's going on here?" Before anyone could explain, Melissa launched into a tirade, claiming she was the victim of a careless child and an unfit mother. But the passengers who had witnessed everything began speaking up, pointing out Melissa's use of racial slurs and her physical aggression toward a child. The small cabin had become a courtroom, with Melissa suddenly realizing everyone around her was watching and judging, and several of them had their phones out, recording everything. The flight attendant, a tall man with kind eyes and a name tag reading Thomas, quickly assessed the situation. Phones were recording from at least 5 different angles. A child was crying, and a red-faced woman was standing in the aisle shouting. "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice and return to your seat." Thomas said firmly but professionally. Melissa turned her anger toward him. Do you know what just happened? This child ruined my designer bag. I want to be moved to another seat immediately. Thomas glanced at the small juice stain on the bag, then at the terrified little girl pressed against the window, her mother's arm protectively around her. We can find you another seat. Thomas nodded, his voice calm. But first, I need everyone to take a breath. The safety of all passengers is my priority. Diana was softly consoling Zoe, who was trying to stop crying but couldn't catch her breath between sobs. The little girl's beaded braids clinked softly as she trembled. She attacked my daughter, Diana said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. She pushed her into the window and used racial slurs against us. Several passengers chimed in at once. I saw the whole thing. She called them horrible names. I've got it all on video. Thomas raised his hands slightly. One at a time, please. A gray-haired woman across the aisle spoke up. That child accidentally spilled her juice when we hit turbulence. This lady completely overreacted and started saying awful things. Then she put her hands on a little girl. I saw it all. Melissa's face flushed deeper. That's not, they're exaggerating. I barely touched her. You pushed her hard enough that her head hit the window, said a businessman 2 rows back, still holding his phone up. And I've recorded every disgusting word you said. Thomas looked stern now. Ma'am, physical contact with another passenger, especially a child, is completely unacceptable. The plane hit another small patch of turbulence, and everyone briefly grabbed their armrests. Thomas steadied himself against the overhead bin. Everyone needs to be seated with seatbelts fastened, he announced. Ma'am, please come with me to the back of the plane where we can discuss this privately. I'm not going anywhere, Melissa said, crossing her arms. Not until they apologize for ruining my things. From the front of the plane, another flight attendant appeared. Behind her was a broad-shouldered man in casual clothes who hadn't been part of the cabin crew during boarding. Is there a problem here? The man asked, showing identification to Thomas. I'm an off-duty air marshal. Would you like some assistance? Thomas nodded gratefully. This passenger has been using inappropriate language and made physical contact with a child. The air marshal's expression hardened. Ma'am, I need you to come with me now. Do you know who I am? Melissa hissed. I'm an executive at Henderson Marketing. I fly first class usually. I know people who can have all of you fired. The air marshal wasn't impressed. What you've done constitutes assault, ma'am, and given the language witnesses have reported, potentially a hate crime. This isn't about customer service anymore. Please come with me without further disruption. Meanwhile, passengers in nearby rows had started passing tissues to Diana and Zoe. An elderly couple offered Zoe a small stuffed bear from their carry-on, which had been a gift for their grandchild. Here, sweetheart, the old woman said kindly. Mr. Bear always makes my granddaughter feel better when she's sad. Zoe accepted the bear with a trembling hand, hugging it close. A teenage girl leaned across the aisle. Hey, I like your braids. They're really pretty with those blue beads. These small kindnesses seemed to help Zoe catch her breath, though she still clung to her mother. Up in the cockpit, the captain had been informed of the situation. His voice came over the intercom system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a situation in the cabin, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky International Airport. We apologize for any inconvenience, but the safety and comfort of all passengers is our top priority. Flight attendants, prepare for landing in approximately 20 minutes. A collective groan went through the cabin. This is your fault, Melissa snapped at Diana and Zoe. You're ruining everyone's day. The air marshal took Melissa firmly by the elbow. That's enough. You're coming with me to the back of the plane until we land. As they walked away, Diana hugged Zoe close and whispered, It's going to be okay, baby. That mean lady can't hurt you anymore. The passengers around them offered supportive smiles and words of encouragement. A doctor from a few rows back came to check if Zoe was injured from being pushed. Outside the small oval windows, the plane began its descent, tilting toward an airport that hadn't been part of anyone's travel plans that day. The plane touched down with a slight bump at Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky International Airport. Most passengers peered out their windows, seeing the unplanned destination for the first time. They weren't allowed to deplane yet. The captain had announced that local authorities would be boarding first. In the back of the aircraft, Melissa sat alone in the flight attendant's jump seat. The air marshal stood nearby, his arms crossed. Her anger had slowly turned to worry as the reality of the situation sank in. She checked her watch nervously. "How long is this going to take?" she asked. "I have an important dinner meeting in Chicago tonight." "That's not my concern, ma'am," the air marshal replied flatly. The plane taxied to a remote part of the airport rather than a regular gate. Through the windows, passengers could see 2 police cars with flashing lights waiting on the tarmac. A ground crew quickly positioned a rolling staircase at the front door. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be delayed here for approximately 45 minutes while authorities handle a situation. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until further notice. We apologize for the inconvenience." 2 police officers boarded the plane. Thomas, the flight attendant, led them directly to the back where Melissa was seated. The other passengers craned their necks, trying to see what was happening. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," said the taller officer, a woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "This is ridiculous," Melissa protested, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. It was just a misunderstanding about a spilled drink. The businessman who had been recording stood up from his seat. "Officers, I have video of the whole incident if you need it. She assaulted a child and used racial slurs." "So do I," called another passenger, holding up her phone. "Me too," added a third. The officers looked at each other. "We'll need those videos as evidence," the female officer said. "If you could please email them to the address on these cards, we'd appreciate it." Her partner handed out business cards to everyone who had been recording. Meanwhile, Melissa was being escorted off the plane. She kept her head down, but everyone could see her face had gone from angry red to pale white. As she passed row 14, she didn't look at Diana and Zoe. Once Melissa was off the plane, a cheer erupted from several passengers. Diana didn't join in. She was still comforting Zoe, who looked both confused and frightened by everything happening around her. The elderly woman who had given Zoe the stuffed bear leaned across the aisle again. "You're being so brave, sweetheart. Are you feeling a little better?" Zoe nodded slightly, still clutching the bear. Outside the plane window, they could see Melissa being placed in the back of a police car. Her designer bag, the one that had sparked the whole incident, was being carried by an officer in an evidence bag. Back in the cabin, the flight attendants were offering free drinks and snacks to help pass the time during the delay. The captain came on the intercom once more. "Folks, the situation has been resolved, and we'll be departing for Chicago in approximately 30 minutes. We'll need to refuel and file a new flight plan. Again, we apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience." Meanwhile, at the airport police station, Melissa was being booked for assault and disturbing the peace. Her fingerprints were taken, and she posed for a mugshot, still wearing her business suit, but with her makeup slightly smeared from stressed tears. "You don't understand," she told the booking officer. "I'm an executive. I can't have a criminal record." "You should have thought about that before putting your hands on a child," the officer replied while typing information into a computer. Back on the plane, passengers had started checking their phones as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. The in-flight Wi-Fi hadn't been turned off during the delay, and the videos were already spreading online. "Oh my God," said a college student in row 10, scrolling through his phone. "Our flight is trending on Twitter. The videos already have thousands of views." The hashtag #PlanicKaren was picking up steam with each passing minute. One passenger's recording had already been shared by a popular news account with millions of followers. Diana looked worried when she heard this. She hadn't wanted this kind of attention. She just wanted to get her daughter safely to Chicago and put this awful experience behind them. The doctor who had checked on Zoe earlier stopped by their row again. "How's she doing?" he asked quietly. "She's calmer now," Diana replied, "but her shoulder is bruised where that woman pushed her. We'll have her checked out properly when we land." "Good idea," the doctor nodded, "and make sure to document it. You might want to press charges." Diana nodded, though the thought of prolonging this ordeal with legal proceedings made her exhausted. All she had wanted was a simple trip to visit her parents. The plane finally took off again, continuing its journey to Chicago. But for everyone involved, especially Melissa, things with Diana looked worried when she heard this. She hadn't wanted this kind of attention. She just wanted to get her daughter safely to Chicago and put this awful experience behind them. The doctor who had checked on Zoe earlier stopped by their row again. "How's she doing?" he asked quietly. "She's calmer now," Diana replied, "but her shoulder is bruised where that woman pushed her. We'll have her checked out properly when we land." "Good idea," the doctor nodded, "and make sure to document it. You might want to press charges." Diana nodded, though the thought of prolonging this ordeal with legal proceedings made her exhausted. All she had wanted was a simple trip to visit her parents. The plane finally took off again, continuing its journey to Chicago. But for everyone involved, especially Melissa, things would never be quite the same. Be quite the same. By the next morning, the videos had spread across every social media platform. Melissa's face appeared on news websites, morning shows, and phone screens across the country. The clips showing her shoving Zoe and using racial slurs had been viewed millions of times. In her downtown apartment, Melissa sat on the edge of her bed in shock. She'd been released from police custody late the previous night after posting bail. She'd had to call her brother to help her since none of her friends had answered her panicked calls. Her phone now buzzed constantly with notifications, most from strangers expressing outrage at her behavior. She opened her email with trembling hands. The first message was from her boss. "Melissa, we need to speak immediately. Please call my office as soon as you receive this." She scrolled further. There were dozens of emails from people she'd never met, with subject lines like, "disgusting racist," and "how could you hit a child?" She closed her email and checked her company's website. There it was, right on the homepage. "Henderson Marketing is aware of the incident involving our employee Melissa Thompson. We condemn all forms of racism and violence, especially against children. Effective immediately, Ms. Thompson is no longer employed by our company." Melissa felt the room spin. 7 years at the company, gone in an instant. She opened Instagram to message a friend and discovered she'd lost hundreds of followers overnight. Comments were flooding her most recent posts. "She a child abuser. Racist. KRANGOT WHHTSHDECRVE." With shaking fingers, she deleted her account. Then she did the same with Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. It was too late though. The internet never forgets. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Diana and Zoe had arrived at Diana's parents' home. Zoe had been quiet for most of the journey from the airport. The doctor on the plane had been right about the bruising. Zoe's shoulder had a purple mark where she'd been pushed against the window. Diana's mother fussed over them both. "I can't believe someone would do that to my grandbaby," she said, her eyes filled with tears and anger. "Have you seen what's happening online?" Diana nodded wearily. "It's everywhere. A reporter already called my cell asking for an interview." "You should do it," her father said firmly. "People need to see what that woman did. Zoe deserves justice." Diana looked at her daughter, who was curled up on the couch with her grandfather's old cat. "I don't know if more attention is what she needs right now." The local news station was persistent, though. They sent a kind producer who promised a gentle interview, conducted in Diana's parents' living room where Zoe would feel safe. After much consideration, Diana agreed. The interview aired that evening. Diana spoke with dignity about the incident, never raising her voice or using inflammatory language. She simply told the truth about what had happened. "All I want is for my daughter to know that when bad things happen, good people will stand up and do the right thing," she said. And that's what I saw on that plane. Dozens of strangers standing up for an 8-year-old girl they'd never met before. The interviewer turned to Zoe, who had agreed to answer just one question. "How are you feeling now?" the reporter asked gently. Zoe looked down at her hands before answering. "Scared sometimes," she said in a small voice. "But my mom says that lady can't hurt me anymore." The interview quickly went viral too, with viewers struck by the contrast between Diana's grace and Melissa's rage. Back in her apartment, Melissa watched the interview and felt a wave of shame wash over her. Seeing Zoe's frightened face through sober eyes made her stomach twist. What had possessed her to act that way? She turned off the TV and sat in silence. Her phone rang. It was her brother. "Have you seen it?" he asked, not bothering with a greeting. The interview? Yes. No, your old neighbor just sent me a photo. There are people outside your apartment building with signs. The press is there too. It's not safe for you to stay there tonight. Melissa went to her window and carefully peeked through the blinds. Sure enough, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk below. Someone had made a sign with her face crossed out. She backed away from the window, her heart pounding. Her comfortable life was unraveling with breathtaking speed. In just 24 hours, she'd lost her job, her reputation, and now, even the safety of her home. Her brother sighed over the phone. Pack a bag. You can stay with us for a while until this blows over. But they both knew that this wouldn't just blow over. The world had seen who Melissa Thompson really was in her worst moment, and now she would have to live with the consequences. 2 weeks after the incident, Melissa sat nervously in a small conference room at her lawyer's office. The walls were lined with law books, and the smell of coffee hung in the air. Her attorney, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and an expensive suit, spread several documents across the polished table. The prosecutor is offering a deal, she said, tapping a finger on the papers. But I need you to understand what we're facing here. Melissa nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked different now, her highlighted hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, wearing a plain blouse instead of her usual designer clothes. They have multiple videos showing you using racial slurs and physically assaulting a minor, her lawyer continued. The child had documented bruising. There are dozens of witness statements, and frankly, your mugshot and the videos have been seen by millions of people online. I know, Melissa whispered. I made a terrible mistake. Her lawyer leaned forward. This isn't just about a mistake. The district attorney is considering hate crime enhancements because of the language you used. That could mean serious jail time. The word jail made Melissa's stomach drop. She thought of her brother's spare bedroom, where she'd been hiding for the past 2 weeks, afraid to go outside, afraid to check her email, afraid of what her life had become. What's the deal they're offering? She asked. 2 years probation, mandatory anger management, 50 hours of community service, and, the lawyer paused, completion of a racial sensitivity course. Melissa nodded. That seems fair. There's more, her lawyer added. They want you to make a public apology to the Williams family, and you'll still have a record, which means finding employment will be challenging. Melissa stayed out the window. Below, people walked along the sidewalk, going about their normal lives, lives she'd taken for granted until recently. Ms. Thompson, her lawyer prompted. There's one more thing. The Williams family is considering a civil lawsuit. The criminal case won't protect you from that. Melissa closed her eyes briefly. I want to accept the deal. And I want to apologize, not because they're forcing me, but because I need to. That evening, she typed out an apology statement with her lawyer's guidance. It would be released to the press the following day. She tried to make it sincere, to explain without excusing her behavior. But when she read it back, the words felt hollow, inadequate for the harm she'd caused. Meanwhile, across town, Diana sat in a different law office. A kind-faced attorney explained the potential civil case against Melissa. Given her termination from her job, it's unclear how much financial compensation we could secure, the attorney explained. But we could certainly seek damages for Zoe's emotional distress and medical expenses. Diana looked down at her sleeping daughter, who had fallen asleep on the office couch, clutching the stuffed bear from the airplane. Zoe had been having nightmares since the incident. She'd become anxious in public places, always looking over her shoulder. The tough, curious little girl had become quieter, more hesitant. I don't want her money, Diana said quietly. I just want my daughter to feel safe again. The attorney nodded. I understand. But consider this. Civil cases aren't just about money. They're about accountability, and any settlement could be put into a college fund for Zoe. Diana considered this. Let me think about it. The next morning, Melissa's apology statement appeared online. It was carefully worded, mentioning a regrettable incident and inappropriate language. It spoke of personal struggles and seeking help. It ended with a request for privacy during a difficult time. Social media wasn't impressed. People called it a non-apology and criticized the passive language. Diana didn't bother reading past the first paragraph. It wasn't what she needed to hear. 3 months after the courthouse appearance, Melissa sat uncomfortably in a circle of folding chairs. The community center room was plain: beige walls, linoleum floors, and a coffee station in the corner. 10 other people sat in the circle, most avoiding eye contact. A facilitator named Dr. Powell, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and no-nonsense manner, stood at the whiteboard. "Today we're discussing the difference between intent and impact," Dr. Powell said. "Many of you are here because you said or did something you claim you didn't mean that way. But good intentions don't erase harmful impact." Melissa shifted in her seat. When she'd first been ordered to attend these racial sensitivity sessions, she'd come reluctantly, sitting silently at the back. Today was her 12th meeting, and she found herself nodding along with Dr. Powell's words. "Melissa," Dr. Powell called, making her jump slightly. "You've been coming for a while now. Care to share your thoughts on this topic?" All eyes turned to her. Some recognized her from the news. The knot in her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "I used to think that if I didn't consider myself racist, then nothing I said or did could be racist," she began quietly. "I thought racism was only burning crosses or using slurs. I didn't understand it could be assumptions, reactions, the way I treated people differently without even realizing it." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "On that plane, I reacted to that little girl differently than I would have to a white child. I didn't think that's what I was doing, but when I look back honestly, I know it's true. My intent doesn't matter. What matters is what I did." Dr. Powell nodded encouragingly. "That's an important insight. Now, how does that understanding change your behavior moving forward?" Melissa had been asking herself the same question during her weekly therapy sessions. Her therapist had helped her dig deep into her upbringing, the subtle messages she'd absorbed from her family, from media, from society. None of it excused her actions, but it helped her understand where her reactions came from and how to change them. "I'm learning to pause," Melissa replied. "To question my first reactions and assumptions. To listen more than I speak, and to accept criticism without getting defensive." After the session, Melissa checked her mailbox at her new apartment. She'd had to move after losing her job. Her savings could no longer support her luxury downtown lifestyle. Now she lived in a modest one-bedroom in a diverse neighborhood she would have avoided a year ago. Among the bills was a letter from her probation officer. She'd been assigned a community service placement at a local after-school program. Starting Monday, she'd be tutoring elementary school children in math and reading. The knot in her stomach returned. Working with children? After what she'd done. Her phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Counseling. 3 p.m. She hurried to catch the bus. At her therapist's office, Melissa shared her anxiety about the community service assignment. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "What if the parents find out who I am? What if I do something wrong again?" Her therapist, a woman with gray-streaked hair and thoughtful eyes, considered this. Fear can be useful when it keeps us mindful, but it's harmful when it paralyzes us. The children you'll be working with need a tutor who sees them fully and treats them with respect. Can you be that person? "I want to be," Melissa said. "I'm trying to be." "Then start there," her therapist replied. "And remember that redemption isn't about making people forgive you. It's about becoming someone who wouldn't cause that harm again." That night, Melissa sat at her small kitchen table, writing in a journal, another recommendation from her therapist. She'd been avoiding something important, but tonight she finally felt ready. She took out a clean sheet of paper and began to write. "Dear Zoe and Diana Williams, you don't know me beyond my worst moment. The woman who hurt you on that plane was someone I never thought I could be, but I take full responsibility for my actions. There is no excuse for what I did. I'm writing not to ask for your forgiveness, which I haven't earned and may never deserve. I'm writing because I want you to know that what happened that day has changed me forever. I am working every day to understand the prejudice that led to my behavior and to become someone who stands against racism rather than perpetuating it. I think about Zoe often and hope that with time and support, she can heal from the trauma I caused her. No child should ever be made to feel unsafe or unwelcome because of their race. If there is ever anything I can do to make amends, I am willing. But I respect your space and your feelings, and this will be my only communication unless you choose otherwise. with deepest regrets and sincere apologies. Melissa Thompson. She sealed the letter in an envelope. Her lawyer had advised against contacting the Williams family directly, but Melissa hoped that someday, when the legal proceedings were completely finished, she might be allowed to send it. The next morning, she looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the polished marketing executive of a year ago. This version of Melissa had humbler clothes, less perfect hair, and tired eyes. But she also had something new, a growing awareness of her own flaws and a genuine desire to be better. It wasn't redemption yet. That would take much more time, much more work. But it was a step on a path she needed to walk, one difficult day at a time. 1 year after the incident on the plane, Diana sat on a park bench watching Zoe play tag with a group of children. The autumn leaves crunched under their feet as they ran, their laughter floating through the crisp air. It hadn't been an easy year. The first few months were the hardest. Zoe had nightmares, became anxious in crowded places, and flinched at loud noises. But with therapy time and the incredible resilience children often show, she had slowly begun to heal. Diana's phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. Settlement papers finally came through. All signed. Done. She let out a long breath. The civil case had been resolved without going to trial. Melissa had agreed to pay for all of Zoe's therapy costs and to establish a college fund for her. Diana hadn't wanted to drag things out in court. That would only mean more attention, more stress for Zoe. "Mom, watch this." Zoe called, doing a cartwheel in the grass. Diana smiled and waved. These moments of pure childhood joy had become more frequent lately. Her daughter was finding her way back to herself. Across town, Melissa stacked math worksheets at the after-school program where she now worked part-time. What had started as court-ordered community service had evolved into something more. After her 50 hours were completed, the program director had offered her a job. It didn't pay much, nothing like her old marketing salary, but it provided something money couldn't buy. "Miss Thompson, can you help me with this problem?" asked a 10-year-old boy, pointing to his homework. "Of course, Anthony," she replied, pulling up a chair beside him. The children here didn't know about her past. Their parents might have recognized her name, but nobody had said anything. She worked mainly with kids from lower-income families, many of them black and brown children who needed extra support with schoolwork. Every day was a lesson in checking her assumptions, in seeing each child as an individual with unique talents and challenges. Later that evening, Melissa attended her weekly support group. The faces had become familiar over the past year, people who, like her, were working to understand and overcome their biases. When it was her turn to speak, she shared her news. "I finally heard back about the civil settlement," she said. "It's official now. Everything I agreed to pay will go toward the little girl's future." "How do you feel about that?" Dr. Powell asked. Melissa thought for a moment, relieved, not because it's over for me, but because I hope it helps her. Money can't undo what I did, but maybe it can give her opportunities. After the meeting, Melissa walked home instead of taking the bus. Her new apartment was just 15 blocks away, in a neighborhood where she was one of the few white residents. When she'd first moved in, she'd felt uncomfortable, convinced everyone was staring at her, judging her. Now she greeted the shop owners by name, chatted with neighbors, and felt at home in a community she would once have avoided. She stopped at the corner store for groceries. The owner, an older man with salt and pepper hair, smiled at her. "How's the tutoring going?" he asked as he rang up her items. "The kids are amazing," she replied honestly. "They teach me more than I teach them." Back home, Melissa checked her email and found a message from her probation officer. "Your request has been approved. The letter can be delivered." Her heart raced. Months ago, she had written to Diana and Zoe, but hadn't been allowed to send it while the civil case was pending. Now, with everything resolved legally, the letter could be forwarded through their lawyer. Diana could still choose to ignore it, of course. Melissa had no expectations, no right to demand any response. 2 weeks later, Diana sat at her kitchen table staring at an envelope. Her lawyer had called to tell her about the letter, giving her the choice to receive it or not. After thinking it over for several days, she had decided to read it. Zoe came in from the backyard, cheeks flushed from playing. "What's that, Mom?" "Just a letter," Diana said. "How about some hot chocolate?" Later, after Zoe was asleep, Diana opened the envelope and read Melissa's words. They weren't what she expected, not defensive, not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledging the harm done and the work being done to change. She folded the letter and put it away, unsure how she felt about it. The next day at Zoe's school, Diana attended a special assembly. Zoe's class had been working on a project about standing up against bullying and racism. Each student had created a poster showing ways to be an upstander instead of a bystander. Zoe's poster read, "Speak up when you see someone being hurt. That's what people did for me." Diana felt tears well up in her eyes. Her daughter had taken something painful and transformed it into a message of hope and courage. As the children presented their work, Zoe spoke clearly and confidently about the importance of helping others who face discrimination. That evening, Diana made a decision. She wrote a brief email to her lawyer. "Please tell Ms. Thompson that I received her letter. I'm not ready for direct contact, but I want her to know that Zoe is doing well. She's using her experience to help other children understand the importance of standing up against racism. That doesn't erase what happened, but it means something good is growing from it." Miles away, Melissa read the message with tears in her eyes. She hadn't expected any response at all. She wrote in her journal that night, "I will never fully repair the damage I caused, but I can spend every day trying to be better than I was yesterday. And maybe someday, years from now, the balance will tip, with more good put into the world than harm taken from it." It wasn't an ending, it was a beginning.